Hello Year 9 and welcome to week 4 lesson 1. Apologies that my face is not on your screen. I had a little bit of trouble with my laptop and I am just getting used to a new program, so hopefully next lesson you may have my face on the screen. So hopefully you'll look forward to that. Today then we're going to look at the poem The Prelude. So if you have your fact book in front of you and a copy of the poem, you'll also need, as always, a pen, pencil, highlighter and a separate piece of paper to make some notes for me, Year 9. That would be lovely. Okay, so then, before we move on, there are a few words in this poem that you might find really difficult. What I would like you to do then is to find the words that are on your screen now, highlight them in your own copy of the poem, and once you've done that, try to find the definitions for me. This is just going to help with your understanding of the poem. You might want to pause the presentation now so that you can do that. And if you have been successful, you should have the following definitions next to each of those words. It doesn't have to be next to the word on the poem. If you want to do it on a separate piece of paper, then you can do. So rapture is intense happiness and pleasure, exulting, being very happy, shod, wearing shoes, confederate, united as a group, chase, another spelling of chase, precipices, steep sides of a cliff or mountain, and tumult, a loud, confused noise. So make sure you understand those. I'm not expecting you to be able to recall every single word. It would be lovely if you can. They are pretty difficult, but just have a go for me. Okay, moving on, we're going to have a read of the poem together then. Follow me reading the poem. If you don't want to listen to my voice, then pause me and you can read it by yourself. I won't be offended. So, and in the frosty season, when the sun was set, and visible for many a mile, the cottage windows through the twilight blazed. I headed not the summons, happy time it was, indeed, for all of us. To me it was a time of rapture, clear and loud the village clock tolled 6. I wheeled about, proud and exulting, like an untied horse, that cares not for his home. All shod with steel, we hissed along the polished ice, in games confederate, imitative of the chase, and woodland pleasures, the resounding horn, the pack loud bellowing, and the hunted hare. So through the darkness and the cold we flew, and not a voice was idle with the din. Meanwhile the precipices rang aloud, the leafless trees and every icy crack tinkled like iron, while the distant hills into the tumult sent an alien sound of melancholy, not unnoticed, while the stars eastward were sparkling clear, and in the west the orange sky of evening died away. Okay, what I want to just let you know is this poem is part of a really big poem. There are different parts to it, but we are just focusing on this one that you have in front of you, which is the ice skating scene. Okay, this is an autobiographical poem. It explores key moments and experiences in Wordsworth's life. So there are lots of parts to this, but we are just focusing on the ice skating scene, just to make that clear to you. Okay, the poem describes the sheer thrill and delight of children as they skate in the gathering darkness on a frosty day. It's a childhood memory of skating with friends. Wordsworth uses imagery of sight, sound and the natural world to bring alive the vivid and joyous experience. Now the poem has a nostalgic feel. He looks back at the innocence and happiness of his childhood. It's based on childhood memories. And Wordsworth admired nature because he was brought up surrounded by it. Yet, in the poem, he becomes frightened by a large mountain and the powers of nature towards the end. And it captures the fear of adulthood and the weakness of humankind against nature at a time of the Industrial Revolution. Now, when we think about the structure and form of this, it's something called an epic poem. And all this means is that it's a long piece of poetry that has a blank verse. There's no rhyme scheme. It almost feels like natural speech. Now remember, this is him looking back on his childhood memories. It's an autobiographical poem. Okay, it's when he went ice skating one winter's night. It's a first-person narrative because it's based on personal experience and it's reflective. But this disappears towards the end when the speaker becomes immersed in nature. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on in the lesson. The tone is light and carefree at the beginning. It's about him having fun. Okay, he loves being out with his friends, within nature, on the ice, and this is something that he loved to do. Wordsworth loved to ice skate. But then towards the end, it becomes a little bit more serious and he becomes more aware of nature. Maybe you could say that there's the death of his love for nature towards the end, but see what you think when you do actually come to the end of our annotations. Now, what I want you to think about, just pause for thought here. Why is there this distinct volta? Now, a volta means a dramatic turning point where the focus shifts to nature. Okay, do we know which word shows a dramatic turning point within this poem? Just something to think about as we move on. Okay, it begins with the end of the day. Picture this scene, the sun's reflecting in the cottage windows. Young Wordsworth ignores his mother's calls. He's too consumed with ice skating, okay, with his friends. And the end reflects the end of the day. The sun sets and the stars appear. There's some key themes then that we could relate to this poem. We've got the natural world, the passing of time, and memory. Maybe the loss of innocence could be another theme that I've not put on here, but actually just thought about that one now. So you might want to add that in for me. Thinking about context then, he was born in Cumberland, which is part of the Lake District, if any of you have ever been. He was the second of 5 children. Okay, both his parents died by the time he was 13, so he had a pretty traumatic childhood. He was then sent to live with his grandparents and his uncle in Penrith, but he really disliked them. And because of this, he often spent time exploring the Lake District to get away and to seek this comfort. Okay, maybe it brings the idea that nature can influence our own behaviour, and we learn to appreciate the wider world of nature, which is something that he did. Crucially, his eldest brother John, who was the captain of a ship, died at sea. This fear of nature, despite its comfort as a child in Penrith, is echoed in the poem, and he was a romantic poet. Now I'm hoping you remember what this means. Okay, remember it's centred on a hatred of urban life during the boom of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, artwork and writings at this time embraced nature and elements of the supernatural. Okay, this has quite a positive tone at the beginning of this poem because he clearly loves nature and he clearly loves being a part of nature at this time. So, what we're going to do is go through annotations. Make sure that you understand every part of this poem as much as you possibly can. Now, it's a tricky poem to get your head around, but hopefully we'll go through and you might start to understand this poem just a little bit more. So, and in the frosty season when the sun was set and visible for many a mile. Now we've got this winter imagery to start, it's the frosty season, but then you've got the cottage windows through the twilight blazed. Okay, you've got this warmth which contrasts to the wintry scene outside. but also it's showing that nature is seen as being frosty and cold. Domestic is this heat, this warmth. You've got, I heeded not the summons. Here he's rebelling against going home. Now this could link to context and the fact actually that he liked being with nature because he didn't like being at home with the family. Happy time it was indeed for all of us. To me it was a time of rapture. So this pronoun us, if you can see it, gives a sense of shared happiness. He loved being outside. It was a time of rapture. It's this joyous occasion, this time to celebrate. He clearly remembers how happy he felt at this moment. The village clock told 6. I wheeled about proud and exulting. Okay, he's fast and energetic. He's excited to be with his friends. You could say that he's kind of strong and free, or that's how he feels. An untired horse, you've got this simile. Okay, he's untamed, he's full of energy. Maybe at this point he feels that he's a part of nature, that cares not for his home, all shod with steel. We hissed along the polished ice in games. Now it's not on your screen, but this shod with steel here, this is sibilance, the repetition of the s sound, which is reflecting the sound of ice skating. Now, as I said earlier, Wordsworth loved ice skating. Okay, we hissed along the polished ice. You've got this movement and sounds of the boys, this sense of freedom. And then if you notice, I've highlighted in green, okay, there's these pauses mid-line to show that he's excited, he's breathless. Okay, then when we go on then, you've got confederate imitative of the chase and woodland pleasures, the resounding horn, the pack loud bellowing. This idea of a hunt as the boys chase each other. Okay, another link to nature here. They're wild and they're energetic. And the loud pack bellowing and the hunted hare, sorry. So through the darkness and the cold we flew. The speed of their movements, the youthful energy that he has. And not a voice was idle with the din. Now this idea of din, which I haven't put on your screen, okay, maybe it's negative connotations, and here is where the tone starts to shift, because you've got meanwhile. Now this is the volta. This is the shift in focus from people to nature. The precipices rang aloud, the leafless trees and every icy crag tinkled like iron, while the distant hills into the tumult sent an alien sound of melancholy, not unnoticed. So the ones in red are showing you a greater appreciation of the natural world, but actually these words are not as positive anymore. You've got tumult, melancholy, you've also got died away at the end. There's this shift in attitude towards nature at the end of the poem. Okay, you've got the simile, nature is softer than human sounds, maybe. Then you've got this melancholy, not unnoticed. There's this sense of sadness and his nostalgia at happier times. He's maybe yearning for simpler times in youth. It's not unnoticed. And he was talking about this alien sound, maybe suggesting the sound of nature is unfamiliar to him now that he is older. He no longer feels at ease with nature. Okay, and then it ends, the orange sky of evening died away. So the day's ending, and you could say, as did his childhood as he became an adult. Remember, this orange has connotations of energy, vibrancy, youth. But actually, as you get older, you could say that this declines with the aging process. Now, there's lots of interpretations, okay, about this poem, and one of those could be that it's his loss of innocence. As he gets older, that loss of innocence. Okay, and as you get older, you become distanced from nature, maybe. Now, I'm hoping that gave you a little bit of food for thought, Year 9, and I know that I've gone through that pretty quickly. We will look into more detail at specific quotations next lesson. But with regards to your key facts for today's lesson, the poem describes the sheer thrill of children as they skate. Hopefully you will have remembered that. Despite it getting dark, the narrator continues to play outside. You've got the two sections. The first focuses on the joys of childhood, and the second becomes more serious because there's this focus on nature. Now it has this nostalgic feel. Have a go for next lesson. What does nostalgic mean? He looks back at the innocence and happiness of his childhood, and he was a romantic poet, and hopefully you now understand, based on this lesson and your previous lessons, exactly what that means. So that is the end of today's lesson. I know I've probably waffled on. Hopefully next lesson you will have my face in the corner for you, which will be exciting, I'm sure. But for now, Year 9, take care, and I will speak to you or see you next lesson.